Welcome to day 3 of the Mastercard Sustainability Week 2022. My name is Andrea and I lead Mastercard Foundry, ESG and Gaming for Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa. And I'm your host for today and also for tomorrow, which will be our last day of the Sustainability Week. We started the journey on Monday and we took a broader view into sustainability innovation. Yesterday, we had an incredible discussion about the magic of carbon calculator and today, we explore what is the role of space in driving sustainability. I think this is just such a incredible topics. I mean, from carbon calculation going into space. And we will discuss how space technologies and applications and research can be utilized to drive sustainable metrics and make Earth and us obviously a safer place to be. So I am sure that the audience is both super curious and also intrigued about this topic and maybe but I just want to set some stage in terms of size of economy. So today, the space economy is worth about $420 billion, and the trajectory is about 1.4 trillion by 2030, which is only 7 years. With the commercial space representing about 80% of the total space activity. And I think this is something to just think about, that in the past, obviously, this whole area was dominated by government. And today, if we say that 80% of this space is owned by private and commercial, it's incredible. So clearly this space has entered a complete new age of renaissance. Forbes pointed that there are currently 10,000 companies globally, which are worth 4 trillion value, specializing in space manufacturing, satellite communication, space tourism, among others. And as the new space economy develops, it cross-connects really closely with sustainability in such an area as Earth observation, energy, and communication. So without further delay, allow me to welcome my panelists. I am truly delighted to be joined today by Tej Bhatia, who is Chief Revenue Officer at Axiom. And this is actually a first commercial space station. I think it's amazing just to think about it, right? Tej leads revenue generation and monetization strategy for commercial development at the space of Axiom Space. But prior Axiom, he led external strategic narrative for the office of the CIO at Google, where he met the C-suite executive at Fortune 100 companies to discuss the future of work, supporting over 4 billion in sales pipeline. So really great to have you, Tej. Welcome to the virtual session and welcome from Dubai. My second guest is Silvio Pervo. He's Chief Technology Officer in Urbanis as AIUR Holdings. So Silvio not only is RAIC accredited urban planner, but he's also designer, geospatial technologist, a full stack developer with over 18 years combined experience in city planning, software development, AR, media, plan tech. And since 2012, he has been developing system architectures and tools with enabling responsive planning and design applied in smart city projects, as well as spatial plan for megacities, space habitats, extreme environments using Geo AI, XR, Earth observation. So Silvio, with that whole experience, it's such a great pleasure to welcome you to our panel. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Ina Vanka, who is my very dear colleague. Ina is a Mastercard futurist and Vice President of Innovation. And she's not only a space expert at Mastercard, but she's also a member of European Center of Space Economy and Commerce. Ina is a prominent Ina is a prominent cybersecurity and AI scholar and advisor. She's really known for a groundbreaking contribution to social, political, and crime justice business issues with a pioneering cyber learning system. Previously, Ina was also director of cybercrime prevention at the Citizen Crime Commission in New York City, where she pioneered and led predictive prevention lab. She also lectures at New York University. So really great to have you, Ina. Let me just jump straight into it. Tej, allow me to start with you. As I mentioned in your intro, Axiom is a first commercial space station. And maybe for the people in audience who don't know Axiom so well, can you just share who is Axiom and what is your personal journey with Axiom till to now?
Sure. Well, great. Well, thank you for having me. Good to see everyone. Thank you, Ina. Also, we connected many years ago on space, long before I started working in space. I will give you a quick overview on what Axiom Space is and how I got involved. So as you mentioned, Axiom Space is building the first commercial space station. And those four words are very accurate to describe what we are doing. A few years ago, Axiom Space received what's called a port contract, which allows us to exclusively dock our station, our private commercial station, onto the existing International Space Station. And that sounds wild and crazy, that a few-year-old startup would get that contract. But this has always been the strategy, because we've known that the International Space Station will be decommissioned and deorbited later this decade. So the strategy of going commercial with space stations is to make sure there's no gap in human presence in low Earth orbit. So Axiom has been given this privilege, obligation, responsibility to make sure our station is up and running before the end of life of the International Space Station. So in a few years, you'll see our first module, which is a habitat for 4 people, dock on to the ISS. A few months later, our second habitat for another 4 people will dock onto that. The third is a research lab where people can work and conduct research and development towards manufacturing. Then there's an Earth observatory. And then our 5th module is a power tower. And up until that 5th tower, we receive all power, cooling, life support from the ISS. So it's very important that our own independent power source is there so we can break off before the end of life of ISS. Prior to that first module going up, we have 4 what we call precursor missions. These are crewed missions. You can think of them as practice missions for us to the ISS before Axiom Station goes online. The first mission went up in April. It's the first ever all-civilian crew to go to the ISS. And then my relationship with Axiom Space, I actually invested in Axiom Space about 3 years ago. My first ever angel investment. And I had become a big fan of the company, the leadership, the opportunity. I've been a space fanatic since I was 3 years old, but my professional career was in technology and startups. And by the time I got to Google, I wanted to be much more involved. So I started by investing in a few companies, Axiom being the first. Then I began advising them, and then they brought me on as chief revenue officer about 1.5 years ago.
And fascinating. It's a great journey to hear. My son wants to be an astrophysicist, and we just finished together to read the Project Hail Mary. I'm not sure if you saw the book, and that is super fascinating. Obviously, for small kids to start so early to be interested in anything space is just absolutely fascinating. Silvio, over to you. Can you bring alive what do you do, and what is your company doing? What are some of the exciting projects you're busy with?
Thank you, Andrea, and also thank you, Ina and Tej. It's great to be here. So my role started as a vision. When I was very young, I wanted 2 things: to go to space and build cities, and preferably to build cities in space. And the way I saw space was always as a very large territory. We don't know how large it is, and is expanding as far as we know. And our Earth is part of that territory. So I found it quite an missed opportunity not to be able to access the resources, the knowledge that is out there. So my role was, I started thinking about how I can produce value for Earth while using space infrastructure. And my current role is creating companions that can take very complex data from satellites, multispectral satellites, radar satellites, and have an impact on Earth through those friendly companions. So it's a matter of not giving people the raw data or the complex information, so they don't need a PhD in remote sensing to maybe grow better food or build better cities with better public health, but actually giving them actionable insights, actionable tools. So we have this kind of integration of technology, natural elements, and also the human component, and what's called a symbiotic intelligence. So by using the human intuition and capability to change and human imagination, combining with the nature capability to adapt and regenerate, and also the technology capability to amplify our goals and amplify our capabilities, especially computing-wise, we can be able to make the Earth greener, make the cities more prosperous, right, and also give access to unprecedented amount of intelligence by using satellites.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much. Ina, you are a Mastercard Space futurist, and probably people are asking, how is Mastercard interested in space and what are the projects you are working on? Tell us a little bit about your journey and what, in Mastercard, what excites you about it?
Thanks, Andrea. I'm super delighted to be here. I also know Tesh and Silvio from earlier days. I joined Mastercard 4 years ago to lead the innovation portfolio called Data and Services as part of the Foundry, which is on a mission to elevate the commercial impact of AI across Mastercard products and services. But I'm also a very big fan of space. And the secret about me is that I'm a fan of Star Trek. When I was a kid, I imagined myself living on a different planet. So space became this magical place that kind of drove my imagination. And what excites me today about space is that there's so much opportunities. So why Mastercard is looking into space, right? Well, first, because space is this kind of source of inspiration. It is basically a tool for a very powerful transformation. Our portfolio is future forward, and it is inspired by our dreams to reach new horizons. So space kind of stretches our mind. It gives us ability to tackle very complicated problems from a different perspective. But second, if we look today at the numbers, I mean, space is becoming, Andrea, really busy. We have a lot of rockets, like satellites, and influx of technologies being launched into orbit. The investments are growing steadily, as you mentioned, right? And so this creates an opportunity, a new territory for us at Mastercard to serve new clients and to build new products. So right. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to establish Mastercard as a multi-planetary enterprise. But this is a journey, right? We need to, first of all, understand and answer the question, what is the role of Mastercard in this new domain? So we have identified short and long-term goals. And over the past 1 year, we have been working on establishing the Mastercard kind of space blueprint in terms of sourcing pipeline, a healthy pipeline of use cases, which we can de-risk with pilot partners, and also share learnings, with our clients who might be eager to enter this new domain, but, they might not have the knowledge or the technology to do so. More specifically, for the past 1 year, to be more tactical, we engaged with universities to look into B2C use cases where we can add value. So considering that, we came up with a very interesting proposition to enhance the kind of the space journey of space travelers. We know that consumers will go to space after 2024. We're also collaborating internally to map out other B2B use cases, prioritize them, and mapping potential partners with who we can co-create and test feasibility of products. We also want to foster dialogue. On topics of relevance, especially now what we are doing, considering, our forum today, we have published a lot of interesting publications. Longer term vision includes expanding our Mastercard products and services in remote areas, maybe the moon, right. Mars, remote territories, and also driving acceptance in remote areas and creating loyalty programs for our new clients.
So if you, obviously everybody's probably interested how, Tej and Silvio tackle the sustainability, but Ina, can you just give us a short summary? What today are some of the sustainability challenges, very concrete, and opportunities of today, and then I will go, to Tej and Silvio to understand how they what are their approaches to these challenges and how they tackle sustainability.
Yeah, so let me frame a little bit. I mean, I'm sure some of these issues came earlier, right, during the week, but the world faces many sustainability challenges today, right? And at a global scale, we can group them into, let's say, economic, social, security, environmental. And so let's start with the environmental. Examples of environmental challenges are global warming due to increased carbon emission, the pollution of oceans, the seas, the animal and species extinction. 1/3 of all known species are at risk, and they might be extinct by 2050. We're also faced with, improper waste management. And so right now, governments and private companies are looking into implementing principles, policies, and standards that kind of can meet our ecological needs. In terms of economic challenges, the economic challenges are preventing the long-term economic growth of a company. And so to tackle those, nations and companies are looking into establishing practices and policies to give access to everyone to resources like natural, financial, such as healthcare. Some of the pressing security challenges are poverty, hunger, disasters. So if we look into all of these kind of challenges, what I want to emphasize here is they're very complicated. They're wicked and hard to unpack. So they require a new kind of perspectives. And the good part is that today we have cutting edge, space technologies, such as remote sensing, Earth observation data that can help us to start tackling these issues. We have also the first commercial station that now gives the infrastructure, serves as a hub to enable researchers and startups to kind of activate proof of concepts into valuable solutions.
Right. So if I take that, let me come to you. What is your approach to sustainability? How does Axiom play a role in that space?
Yeah, so Ina mentioned these 4 concrete areas, and I could give you distinct use cases on how space and Axiom Space can tackle those. But I think both of you said very nicely before in the opening that it's not about space solving the sustainability problem. It's more about space being a catalyst or a driver for this. And the way I see it, not just for Axiom Space, but for the space industry, is we can't do it alone. And that is probably the theme of sustainability as a whole. It has to be a collaborative effort. And when I say we can't do it alone, and I'll speak just for Axiom Space right now, our customer segments are governments, corporations, and private individuals. When it comes to space exploration in the early days, you hear a lot of the press about these private individuals who have paid their own way, which is true. Our first 4 customers are individuals, but they are true pioneers and explorers, and many of them are driven by a philanthropic passion that they can show the rest of the world that all this is possible. And sustainability is a big part of all of their missions. And when you look at governments, which have historically driven the space industry, that is, you talked about the market and all the money that's going, I would say it's almost exclusively, with the exception of some satellite communications, is almost exclusively a government endeavor. Historically, it's been a government endeavor. And when you see, when we talk to our government customers about why they're looking at commercial space as the future for them, sustainability in many of those cases is a big part of it. The big missing piece, in my opinion, is the corporations. And Ina said it very nicely that there's an eagerness. And of course, there's an eagerness. Ina's a perfect example. I'm a perfect example. When I was at Google, we didn't have an official space unit, but we had a group called Google Space. And when I was there, was about 600 people who were eager to work in the space industry, but we have to convert that eagerness to willingness. And I think that willingness comes from the top, it comes from the bottom, but it needs a vehicle to get there. And I personally believe sustainability is that vehicle, because it's the one thing that can align all of the corporations. I'll use the Global 2000 right now, all of their personal mission statements, their individual mission statements, with a greater goal that's actually a common theme across all corporations. I'll bet you if you look at every Fortune 100 report, ESG is a big part of it, as is innovation and acceleration. But I will talk about sustainability. You take a company's mission statement, sustainability, and space, and you'll actually find a common thread across all the major corporations. So to answer the question about how Axiom Space is looking at sustainability, it's this collaborative opportunity we have and this unique position we have, both literally, in space, but also bringing these 3 distinct segments of influence and impact together and having conversations like this one that I can guarantee you have never happened in human history before. When you get a corporation, a government, a space company, and impact investor in a room together with something that's actually possible, like a private space station, the ideas that come up are not science fiction at all. They're very real, and we at Axiom Space have proven it a few times now.
I think this is absolutely brilliant. Let me just maybe stay with you for a second, because obviously you spoke about the sustainability a little bit, right? And can you elaborate a little bit more? How is Axiom preparing itself to become the next, generation space station? You talk a little bit in the intro, but can you go a little bit deeper and connect, what would be the connection then into sustainability?
Yeah, it's interesting, those areas that Ina mentioned. I'll talk about a few of them, like environment, economics, security. So independent of sustainability, the use cases across all those are documented and discussed, and we're building towards those, whether that's Earth observation for climate change, Earth observation for data and insights, Earth observation for urban planning, and Silvio can talk a lot more about that. Many times it's just about space having a location with a camera down, right? But it's not about those pictures, it's about the insights that those pictures are giving us. And there is so much more data that can be applied terrestrially along with the data we get from space that can give us a much better picture and predictive analytics and actions we can provide. So from an Earth observation, I think the use cases in general from Axiom Space for corporations, for governments are great. And I think that will support sustainability. The economic piece to me is the most important. So I often use sustainability in my talks in two ways. One is obviously the sustainability that we're speaking about today, but you mentioned the market numbers, the market size numbers, and I think it was maybe a few $100 billion right now, growing to 1.4 trillion. And,
exactly.
And I've seen other reports, in 2040, however number of trillions. And I have to remind everybody in my industry, especially venture-backed companies, that that's not nearly enough. Sure, we can't predict what the size of the market is, but for us to be sustainable companies, Axiom Space is venture-backed, and if you just use basic venture math on how much money we're going to raise, have raised, and how much we will raise, the investors that have put in the money in their portfolio, what percentage is in space and what percentage of these companies they own, the returns they need to make, there is no option for venture-backed space companies but to be the next Google or Amazon of the world. We have to aim to be the biggest companies in the world, the most important companies in human history in this next decade. So these market numbers often scare me because that's not a big enough market for even one company.
I love the perspective.
Yeah, so for us to be a sustainable company, and I'm talking economically right now, not overall sustainability, just purely is there enough business, we have to develop entirely new markets to grow that overall business, and we have to create a sustainable economy in space. So this is where I think corporations play that key role. The governments will help us get there. The governments have the starting budgets and the use cases and the needs, but we have to identify what it is for corporations.
Right.
And this is going to bring it full circle back to the sustainability we're talking about today. Is once there's a sustainable economy in space, there's more and more opportunity for us to shift certain manufacturing, certain processes we do here on Earth off planet. But we're not going to be able to convince anyone to do that if there's not a valuable business case. We can say it's not good for the planet and, life on Earth will be a lot better. But if you can show that some of these factories and plants actually can make much more money and have a much higher return by being in orbit or being far off the planet, that's a much stronger case, in my opinion, to get people to actually act.
Great. That you mentioned something around, taking the pictures from the orbit, that's really about the insights. And I think, Silvio, I love what you said in the beginning, that obviously, it's not just data dumping, but it's understanding what the insights are and what is the, how can you use them to greater good. Can you share your thoughts with the audience how working and researching in space can really improve the entire ESG or sustainability aspiration on Earth, and give us some examples?
Sure. I think being physically in space, first of all, can provide valuable technologies and new methods to improve Earth conditions. So, for instance, by developing new types of seeds in space in certain conditions that are maybe radiation resistant, or they can thrive in different gravity conditions, it can provide us better ways to grow food in extreme conditions on Earth. So we have, if we think about desertification alone, not only coastal erosion, but desertification currently happens in the areas where you have the highest concentration of people, and in the areas we have usually agricultural land. So you have more people in those areas with less land to grow food, and you have also harsher conditions to grow food. In the same time, we have coastal erosion, and most of the populations are concentrated in coastal cities. So our land availability to grow food and cities is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So being able to thrive in extreme environments with high radiation, with extreme temperatures, in extreme conditions, can help us to apply that on Earth. And I will give here some examples. When the Chernobyl reactor was cleaned, they used robots developed in the context of space exploration, rovers that were developed to resist high amounts of radiation. And even those failed a couple of times, but by not having those robots, those technologies, it could have been a much bigger disaster. Another example is our knowledge about human physiology and what kind of issues can appear in human physiology on Earth, but also in space. And another application, which I think is extremely important, especially if we talk about our future, is energy and resource security.
Mm-hmm.
The moon is rich in helium-3 because it doesn't have an atmosphere. So helium-3 isotope is essential for fusion reactions. And also the moon is rich in platinum group materials. NASA chief scientist a couple of years ago mentioned that the moon looks like it was almost put there for us in the future in case we'll have a major challenge. And I think that major challenge will come in the next 100 years. But we have the moon, and we also have a lot of space beyond Earth that we can use to move some heavy industry and keep Earth the garden it is right now. And also being able to regenerate it by not extracting the resources from Earth, but maybe extracting it from asteroids, or going to Mars and extracting from asteroid belts. So by going in space to the moon and Mars, it opens us the horizons of sustainability on Earth. And also it allows us to develop those kind of technologies and discoveries that in Earth conditions are simply not possible.
Impossible. I just want to get a little bit more tactical with you, Sylvia. We all seen the news. We saw the extreme temperature, the drought, the wildfires, the destructive, events, and it becomes more and more severe and frequent. At the same time, we are witnessing an explosion in technology and launch into space and satellites. And I think that touched on it a little bit. So consider, the number of satellites launched in orbit and growing by 2030. It will be about 10 times more than we have today. I think 57,000 is the number, right? I think not only me, but in the audience, we are super curious. How can you leverage the satellites and sensor technology to address the climate change? Can you shed some light on it?
Yes, I like to make a parallel here compared to astronauts on the International Space Station. So when they have a major challenge, it's usually something that's extremely complex. It's a complex matter. It's very unpredictable, and it can go bad very quickly. So usually they have a short amount of time to solve that challenge, and for that they have what they called one pagers. So one page to explain a certain tool, one page to explain a certain let's say mechanism or what kind of tactic they need to apply for that moment. And putting on the one pager, they are able to take that decision in one breath because the oxygen levels can go low. Now on Earth, we have the benefits of having a little bit more time, but the challenges are very complex, and they're not only environmental challenges, socioeconomic challenges, but also the decision flow sometimes can be very slow. So one of the things that we developed and we studied quite a lot in the last years was taking all that complexity that comes from raw data, from domain-specific expertise, and putting it in one single page interactive format. So it can be one app or it can be one link. So instead of having the requirement of reading thousands of books about it and trying to figure out what is the method and how you can use space data, especially multispectral data or radar technology, you can have those tools with actionable insights in layman terms, so you can take action right then, right now. And one of the good examples is about heat urban island effect. So with raising temperatures in many areas, with less vegetation, with more dense cities that had less greenery, the heat urban island effect is quite a major issue. And it's a major issue because it can lower the capacity to memorize, to learn, to be productive economically. Lack of vegetation and lack of cool temperatures is a large predictor also for low public health conditions and also low economic conditions. And just by improving the temperature and the amount of greenery in an area, you can improve multiple things in the same time. But in order to improve it, you need to be able to measure it. So right now, there are a number of satellites from the NASA constellation and European Space Agency constellation. And those satellites can produce this kind of raw data, which we take, and we provide that in a standardized format that can be actionable by everyone. And talking about standardization, I think, especially if we talk about ESGs, it's more important than ever to have a very reliable way to standardize procedures. So, for instance, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, with their tech partner program, is including the human expertise from the surveying side, but also the technologies that can amplify those capabilities.
Yeah.
Because when it's about amplifying capabilities, is knowing what's the right data, but also the right tech and domain expertise.
You know, I have a great question for Ina, but before I go there, you know, as you were describing it, I'm a banker for many years before I joined Mastercard, and I was almost, you know, imagining for within the SMEs proposition how even banks could consume some of these data and transform them, especially for farmers or productions, for many other industries, and actually help their customers to better manage their crops, obviously have better productions. I think that today they still rely on very basic data, but I think once you democratize it and almost like bundle it, I can, you know, as you described, almost like, you know, easy app or instead of big data. So how even the corporation can bring it to their customers and benefit them and translate it. And I found it absolutely fascinating. You know, and we spoke a lot about satellites. You know, Ina, can you imagine life without GPS? I think the satellites, you know, we're launching into space could have transformative impact on every single person on Earth and as GPS today. And, you know, what are other areas which we can use multispectral and synthetic aperture radar to tackle sustainability issues here? Like, you know, I think a little bit of it was mentioned, food security, you monitor human trafficking, land temperatures, access to internet, you know, supply, demand, and combination. What is your viewpoint on that?
Thanks, Andrea. And yeah, I cannot live without GPS for sure. And who can? But satellites, as Tesh said, satellites data is really powerful. We have lots of data. It's very challenging, though, to process this data. You will need computational power. You will need, you know, storage, such as cloud, and also some sort of like AI or machine learning that can kind of create the insights. And so when we leverage AI and data, we can definitely create the magic. For example, you know, according to the World Economic Forum, satellite constellation can help stop illegal fishing and spread, you know, the wildlife for that account for more than 70 billion a year. AI algorithms that are trained on satellite data and also from previous incidents can spot forced labor, human trafficking, because they can learn to recognize these images from previous cases, learn how, you know, to spot visual clues from current data, and then apply this knowledge into some predictions that can outline what potential, you know, disaster could look like in the future. So we can use satellites and AI for disaster response, for understanding triggers in the environment, Also, for example, in South Africa, the South African Space Agency has used satellite data and predictive analytics to kind of spot pandemic outbreaks such as malaria. But not only that, right? So we have massive amount of data, predictive analytics that needs to be we need to use creative to solve problems. Satellites also can be used to connect 49th of the world's unconnected population. We have areas where we don't have, internet, and so satellites can broadcast communication through radio waves. I mean, even right now, the new edition of Apple iPhone uses satellite internet for emergency SOS messages. And as Silvio alluded, in general, just besides, the satellite communication, space can enable medical research. I mean, it is very difficult sometimes to conduct research in terrestrial environment, and certain microgravity and the microgravity allows in general the growth of proteins that can help us to tackle a lot of diseases, even Parkinson's. So I think there are a lot of applications. Back to the point of Tash, we need collaboration, proper investment, and understanding of what are those challenges and needs, so that we can really start utilizing more awareness to solve these problems that we're faced now here on Earth.
I'm happy you mentioned the word collaboration, and Tej, I want to come back to you because, you also mentioned it in the beginning, and it seems that collaboration is really one of the key pillars to address the major sustainability issue. How is Axiom collaborating with governments or even other commercial sectors to drive these sustainability efforts?
Sure. So I'll talk about a few countries that we are working with and a few corporations we're working with. I want to touch a little bit about the question you had about satellite data and something all three of you said. There's a lot of information coming from satellites, and I'll give you a very specific use case that I think will be the first very large market for the space industry, for Axiom, and which will tie all this together. It is the future of cloud computing in space. Right. Mm-hmm. So Ina mentioned a few layers of it. There's the data, there's AI ML. Right now, the information that's coming in is pretty raw. Like I said, it's JPEGs, pictures of Earth being put through a very small bandwidth pipe. The fundamental layers of computing in space, being able to process data up there, better communication down to Earth, or more efficient communication down to Earth, and then latent communication as we go out to the moon and Mars. There's a whole other suite of intellectual property that's going to come out just in the cloud computing space because of it moving off planet, which I'm very excited about. But it brings back to a point that you said, and I'll tie this back to the countries and corporations, is this democratizing of data. So the example you gave is, wouldn't it be great if you could go to your customers and use that space data? Now imagine a situation where you have the space data as an open, democratized data set, and you have all your data. And I'm just saying Mastercard, and then we'll open this up to the general data community, but just the information that Mastercard has, safely, pure, anonymized, whatever, put those two together. Now, sure, you can go to your customers and tell them about climate, piracy, human trafficking, whatever in their market. But let's bring it back to a very simple use case. We can go to shrimp farmers in Ecuador and on their phones provide data, whether that's purchasing data in New York City, tied to shipping data and climate data and weather data, down to just whether they should be going out earlier or later that day, which could actually make a huge economic impact locally and globally. And this is just one tiny case of me combining Mastercard and space data. Now take all the data sets we have, take all the technology we have about open data sets, and just, you mentioned I worked at Google. Prior to that, I was also at Citibank, Citi Ventures. So take all that stuff and put it together, and there's real opportunity. Now bring it back to your question about the governments. We've announced that we have partnerships with, we're sending an astronaut from the UAE up to space, 2 Saudi astronauts. I mentioned those first because of the region you're in, but Italy, Hungary, Turkey. I mentioned the 4 private astronauts. These are our next 5 country astronauts. We also have announcements with Canada and New Zealand and several more coming. So on the country side, you see a lot of these countries participating primarily now in human spaceflight, sending astronauts up, but there is a whole suite of research that they're doing with their local institutions and science, and much of the science is about Earth observation and climate protection. Then on the corporate side, a few of the partnerships we announced through our first mission, one is Amazon, and I've mentioned my, particularly AWS, Amazon Web Services. I've mentioned my excitement about data centers in space, and that being the first big market, in my opinion. But then you have the number of research we did around biotech and pharma and those opportunities as well as non-space companies. I know Amazon is also technically a non-space company, but they're very forward-leading in space. But we've partnerships with Omega, Loro Piana. We announced one recently with a champagne company, GH Mum, which is part of the Pernod Ricard family. And our conversations with traditionally non-space companies are coming to light. And like I said, I think the combination or the tying thread will be sustainability and ESG. And this is not a long-term thesis that I've had for years or decades. This is really from the time Ina reached out to me about this panel we're having right now. And then Ina, Silvio, and myself, and you were having connectivity problems. We were preparing for this. And some of the ideas we had about layering on different types of data to provide an entirely new set of insights, we're talking weeks of conversation. So the opportunity here is the more we collaborate, the more discussions we have, the more opportunities we're going to uncover.
You know, it's interesting what you said about what really resonated is some of the cloud computing, right? I think not only in our region, but many other regions, you see many central banks and governments starting to localize, right? Because especially what's happening in the outside world, so when they want to have a lot of control, which ultimately creates a lot of emissions, a lot of carbon, because they're setting up their new data center. If you imagine that every central bank, every government, everybody will build layers and layers and layers of physical data centers to move it up to space, and having, you know, joint computing power in space where, you know, nobody can just easily shut them down without, and that's, I think, much more sustainable than creating so many different physical spaces, which obviously are always overbuilt, so they are not maximized to their entire capacity. So I really like where you're going with it. I think that Silvio, you know, we mentioned that, you know, before. Do you want to add something to it before I go to the next one? Because it's so fascinating. You know, you probably have your own opinion, so please keep it coming.
No, I wanted to say we can also use Mastercard blockchain provenance solution. In space, you know, to kind of ensure the supply chain standards and data that can and can be used. We can use satellites data for that too. So it just came as a brainstorming.
Silvio, anything you want to add to that theme before we move to the next question?
Yeah, I think combining different technology in the data set is quite important, and there is no single use case that I think now on Earth cannot benefit, especially when it's about ESG, cannot benefit from space, because anything that happens has a location, right? And by being able to enrich the intelligence around what's happening from a causal perspective and also relationship perspective, can enrich our understanding of how the world works and how different policies, for instance, work. So one of the things we've done was also monitoring the impact of certain policies or monitor the impact of certain vegetation. What's the impact for public health, for instance? And by not observing that with satellites, it would have been extremely complicated to do that only with sensors or with just some postcode level data sets. So that's why I think it's very important to combine all those technologies and data sets.
So yeah, I want to stay a little bit at the satellite topic, because, you know, we in the beginning, I think we were talking about 57,000 of satellites, which is quite a massive number, and it's only increasing. So it will also create quite a lot of, you know, possible trash in space and on Earth. How do we keep that clean? How do we, stop polluting Earth and the space in that sense?
Yes. So I think here it's about finding practices that can reduce the trash in the first place. Every single launch has, beside trash, also an environmental impact. The environmental impact on biodiversity, environmental impact on the air quality. It produces a massive amount of emissions. And being able to use cleaner fuel and also reusable rockets, similar to what SpaceX and Rocket Lab is doing, can allow us to use those space components more and more without creating that trash. Now, we have already a lot of space debris in space, and European Space Agency and NASA are looking at ways to clean it up. But it's always a matter of how big that debris is and how quickly it moves. So depending on the orbit, the closer it is to Earth, the faster it is. So even something that's like a very small piece of metal or paint, imagine that it's moving faster, 10 times faster in some cases than a bullet. And even a very millimeter level debris can affect a space mission, especially if it's on a space station. So on the ISS, they previously had major issues when small space debris hit the station. It's not only about the habitation modules and oxygen reserves, but it can also be about telecommunications. It can affect the mission operations and all those satellites that we rely on for communications on Earth as well. So the number of tactics or methods you can use to clean the space. One of them is using lasers, so you can target lasers. There are also some approaches using nets. Probably is more suitable for larger pieces. And there are also new methods involving bee-wax. So there are some interesting, I think this was provided by Ina earlier. Yes. So there are new innovative ways to use the space debris, and also a way to recycle them. So there are many, they're not well-established infrastructure pieces right now that can actively clean it up, but that's a major consideration when we want to send more things in space, especially in lower orbits, when things are faster and faster and they're way more unpredictable.
Yeah, I was almost imagining like a space cowboy with his putting the net, fetching some debris, and having like a Star Wars laser kind of weapon, pointing at it. I think, if you really, that could be the cartoon of it. That I want to come one time back to you. We were talking about, how you're launching, I think, 2 astronauts from Saudi, 1 UAE. There were some other ones from Europe. So there seemed to be these regional cooperation has been super invaluable, to helping some of the countries integrate and expand Earth space capabilities into their programs. And Ina mentioned some of the examples in Africa and obviously Southeastern Europe. So I'm curious, how is Axiom partnering more maybe in depth with our region? I mean, you mentioned obviously a couple of astronauts, but is there anything else which Axiom is doing in EMEA?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. So the obvious ones are the astronauts going up, right? We all like to talk about that. The Saudi astronauts are training right now. They'll be sending a man and a woman up on our AX2 mission, which is in April. That'll be the first ever hybrid private professional mission. It'll be 2 men, 2 women, commanded by Axiom commander Peggy Whitson, who's a longtime NASA astronaut. But the pilot is a private individual, and then you have the 2 Saudi astronauts. And these are huge and very expensive missions. So I don't want to oversell how often you'll see that. I think you'll see that definitely, and that will get the headlines. But there's a few other things that are happening, and I'll draw the parallel back to the internet and cloud computing. So let's say the internet in 1996, and then cloud computing in 2006 with the introduction of Amazon Web Services. So where we are in the space journey, the commercial space journey right now, I believe is 1993-ish of the internet. And what Amazon and Google and some of these companies realize is they had to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure just to support their business, whether that's fiber across oceans, data centers, all over the world, hardware, software, operating systems, talent. They had to do that regardless to support their businesses that didn't have real business models yet or were losing a lot of money. And they realized at some point that they need to overbuild that infrastructure anyway, so why not fractionalize it and make those capabilities available to everyone else? So when you're talking about what's Axiom doing in the region, we are thinking of ourselves as a venture-backed company, and this is what commercialization does, is we have to spend billions over the next several years just to get our station up. So we want to make our capabilities the capabilities of our partners on the ground. And so UAE and Saudi Arabia are perfect examples. It's very big examples because they're sending astronauts up, and we're so happy about that. But you don't need to send astronauts up. You can do research up there. You can do insights, advisory. What a lot of countries want is that local expertise on the ground, building up their own space capabilities, and having to start from 0 to 1 is very difficult. But when you have a partner that already has sustained and permanent access and infrastructure in space, it makes it very easy then for entrepreneurs and institutions to identify the key capabilities in that country and build up that expertise. So it could be AI, it could be data, it could be physical development of hardware. But what the commercialization of space and what we want to bring to the region in the Middle East is that opening of opportunities, that sharing of ideas, the plug-in into supply chain, which really wasn't possible before, and that opportunity for Axiom to play that role to create more of those partnerships across nations. And we're already seeing that. I can't say more right now, but in 2023, you'll see several other programs launching in addition to human spaceflight. The next level is sustained research and development and manufacturing happening in space. Axiom also recently was awarded the spacesuit contract. We have several missions going up, and we are going to be bringing as many nations in the world as we can and as many corporations in the world as we can into those programs.
Amazing. Silvio, what are some of the, and to your point that Saudi is now sending astronauts. They just won a match yesterday in the Football World Cup. And I think that our entire Saudi office was, just celebrating. So it's obviously leading on many, many areas, right?
Yeah, before we got on this panel, we were talking about various time zones. So yesterday when I woke up, I looked at the scores and I didn't believe actually first when I saw it. But the first thing I did was call our Saudi partners and congratulate them. And it's a big deal.
It's wonderful. Silvio, to you, what are some of the projects which you do in the region, if any?
Yes, so one of the things that are quite core to our activity at Mega is regenerating land, greenifying the earth. So I think one of the things we're doing is looking for areas that are now desert or very challenging to grow food. And we're looking at ways, and we're creating this companion that you select an area and it tells you what's the best food to grow and where to sell it and what is viable, because it's a combination of things, right? You want to, first of all, you want to make sure that your crop is profitable. So the time and resources you invest, it can actually be used for profitable reasons. And you can sustain that farm and that activity. But second, you need to ensure that your plot of land can accommodate that crop. And if it can accommodate that crop, what do you need to do in order to accommodate it? So one of our core activities is creating this technology, this companion, that you don't need to be an expert in remote sensing. You don't need to be an expert in Earth observation. You don't even need to be an expert in agriculture. You just need to be able to select your land, and then it can give you options, the best 3, 4, 5 options of crop that you can grow, and then where you can sell it. And MENA and also other areas in desert areas are extremely special because in many cases they can have good accessibility and good markets, but the way they can grow can be very challenging. So that's why we were partnering with research organizations that are doing a lot of PhD level research on salt resistant crops and desert resistant crops. Our team was also involved in technologies such as developing the business case behind ways to regenerate soil by injecting nanoclays and certain substances. So a soil that cannot grow anything can all of a sudden grow different vegetables, different crops, and can also greenify the areas. So this is one of the focus in the MENA region. And also another focus is enhancing the public health by seeing hidden patterns and opportunities to improve infrastructure and also the greenery and biodiversity in those areas. And this is particularly important because those areas are usually getting hotter and hotter, and certain type of green infrastructure is not able to sustain lower temperatures. So again, finding the right crop or finding the right species, tree species especially, it's extremely important for them.
You know, it's interesting what you said, because I lived here for about 7.5 years. And if you would tell me before I moved here, I moved from South Africa, where anything you put into the earth is just gross. You don't need even to have green fingers. But if you would tell me that I would be able to grow aubergines in my garden and basil and all of it, I would just look at how is it possible? But it's really fascinating that despite the fact that we're in the desert, if there is enough water, anything can grow. And that some of these, obviously, if people are provided the right information, the right infrastructure, you can turn many of these ecosystem into much more productive and much more sustainable. So we have 4 minutes. This is so, it's just running like we just started. So I just want to ask you the last question, and I will start with you. I mean, maybe we went from crops and to satellites, to research and data. I just want to close up, if out of all of us, where do you see personally, some of the biggest opportunities and the best practices to incorporate for businesses into their sustainability agenda in connection to space after they will listen to you today? If you can start.
Sure. I mean, for me, look, I think it starts with awareness, right? What we talked about, and we need to bring this topic to the awareness of how we can use technology infrastructure and new models to the public, to the corporations. Second, we need collaboration, as we said, and we need to make space accessible to consumers, to startups, to developing countries, so that they can integrate the proper, programs or to launch practices that can really tackle some of the issues.
Amazing. Silvio?
I think it starts with a change of perspective and looking at planet Earth like a large body and thinking about planetary health. So in order to have a healthy planet, is not enough to limit growth, right? It's not enough to limit the kind of agriculture activities or energy expenditure, but also looking at how to build more infrastructure for people, grow more food, conquer the areas that are inaccessible to grow food and make them green. So instead of having a limitative approach, like let's consume less, in some cases might work, but it's also, well, let's produce more and also reduce the impact, or even more, produce a net value. So having a garden in the desert where was only sand is a perfect example. You take something that was not usable, it was dead, and you create life. You bring life there. You create a new economy of scale. You create new ecosystem services. So this is extremely important to start building more, not only thinking from a political point of view or policy or targets point of view, but also thinking about how you can build and grow and create prosperity. So it's an abundance mindset, which I think is very important in business, in urban planning, in agriculture, and in policy in general.
Amazing, wonderful. That last statement from you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, and wonderful final statements by Ina and Silvio. I'll build on those, and I'll build on some of the comments I saw in the chat. People are speaking about how cool this is, and it is very cool and mind-opening. What I can tell you from my experience in, I say 1.5 years, but it's been 16 months, a little over 16 months in this role, is these conversations are very real. And they're not just exciting because we're talking about some far off future. We're talking about right now. And your question was about, opportunities and predictions for 2023. What I can tell you as Chief Revenue Officer and directly working with customers and signing these deals is there will be a handful of private astronauts, these explorers, these pioneers that can be amplifiers of the story. out to the world. And they in themselves are ecosystems and they bring a lot of impact. Then you've got the governments who have been doing this for decades and will continue to do this, and they're excited about commercial space companies coming in. As I mentioned, the biggest missing gap, in my opinion, which is the first part of the future, is corporations. So like Mastercard, like other Fortune 100 Global 2000 companies, that's when this goes from, science and government to business and a real economy. And when we do that, the real exciting future comes on is when the startups and entrepreneurs can come in and start doing things that we haven't even thought of. So, for everyone who's excited about this, Ina and I are having a separate conversation about how Mastercard and Axiom can work together. And I can tell you, we're having conversations at Axiom with many companies. So to be able to bring this abundance mindset that Silvio talks about, from everything from resourcing to spending to what's possible, I'll bring it back to the point of collaboration. When we can all provide our expertise, our insights, our data, and our smartest people who are excited about this, that's when we change the future. And I have no doubt in my mind that that's going to happen in 2023.
Amazing. I think there is so little to add. I just want to personally thank all three of you, Tej, Silvio, and Ina, for joining me today. It was so transformative. I think we are all leaving with incredible ideas. I would encourage people in the audience to obviously follow Tej, Silvio, and Ina on LinkedIn and connect to their companies and see what they're doing and all the exciting stuff they do. And I can't wait to go to space myself and explore. I think we now all inspired. I think Ina is driving the revolution in Mastercard. So once again, thank you very much. For the audience, please join us for our last session tomorrow, which will tackle financial inclusion and community paths in Uganda and Kenya. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Take care of yourself.
Have a great
so
day.
much.
Ad astra.
Thank you.
Thank you.